welcome to everybody. I have not been at one of the Wednesday night gatherings, but I have watched all of them on replay, or that's not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about. And so have enjoyed seeing all the presentations very much. Tonight, we're going to talk about the parable of the sower. And of course, everybody would say, and I'm not used to saying everybody would say because that's not correct, but I imagine that everybody would say, oh, we've heard that one a million times, and we know exactly what that one's about. Jesus told us what it was about. Well, let's see. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is watch a short little YouTube video. This is a godly play presentation on the sower. Godly play, as you know, is widely used in the Episcopal Church. And godly play is has its own interpretation, well, not its own interpretation, but its own present way of presenting this parable. So this particular one comes from, as it happens, St. Andrew's Church in Jacksonville. And so it's about 6.5 minutes long. And if you'll listen and pay attention as though this was the first time you've ever heard this parable. And Mike, there we go.
Hello, welcome to Godly Play. Are you ready for our story? Okay, let's get started. This box is gold. I wonder if there is a parable inside. Parables are even more valuable than gold. This box is also old. Parables are pretty old. Sometimes parables can be hard to get into. But if you keep coming back, eventually they will open. I know. Let's open up this box and see if there is a parable inside. I wonder what this could be. Certainly is brown, isn't it? Brown everywhere. Let's see if there's anything else to help us get ready. There's a lot of things in this box, but nothing else to help us get ready. So let's go ahead and start our story. There was once a man who said such wonderful things and did such amazing things that people began to follow him. And as they followed him, they asked, "What is the kingdom of heaven like?" And one day he said to them that the kingdom of heaven is sower, someone who scatters seeds, goes along a path, sowing their seeds. And the birds came. And ate the seed. The sower also scattered seeds among rocks. But when the seeds tried to push their roots down into the earth, they couldn't get down through the rocks. And when the sun came out, they were scorched and they died. The sower also sowed seeds amongst the thorns. But when the seeds tried to push through to the earth below, they were choked by the thorns and they died. The sower also sowed seeds on good earth. And when the seeds pushed their roots through the good earth, they grew and grew and grew until eventually, when it was ready for harvest, were gathered up. Harvest was 30, 60, 100 bushels. I wonder if this person had a name. I wonder how he felt when he saw the seeds getting burnt on the rocks and on the thorns. I wonder how he felt when he saw the seeds growing in the good earth. I wonder how the birds felt when they saw him. I wonder what the story could really be. Thank you for spending time with me today. And now I want to leave you with your blessing. May the Lord bless you and give you a wonderful week. Bye.
So that is godly play. That's very typical of godly play as it's used in the Episcopal, as it's used in our church and the Episcopal church. I'm not sure if it's used so much right now at St. John's, but it has been widely used for a long time. So what did you notice about this telling of the parable of the sower? Is there anything that you noticed or that surprised you?
I see a big smile on Susan's face because she is one of our godly play instructors.
That's true. And I'll respond to that by saying we're not instructors, we're storytellers and doorkeepers. And the purpose of godly play is to get the kids engaged in the story at their own pace and their own level, and not to tell them what it's about, but to tell the story and ask them what they noticed.
I think the kids would be interested with the question that she asked at the end of, what do you think the birds thought?
Mm-hmm.
Sower.
So Susan, have you told this particular story in a godly play setting, or?
No, I have not. No, and Joe, we are using godly play right now at St. John's.
Okay.
Yes, where we're using a YouTube access, and also Liesl is using it in the power hour between churches meetings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Mm-hmm.
So other comments. What do you notice? What surprised you about this this telling of the story? The answer could be nothing. I mean, yeah, it'd be fine. Just wondered.
I thought it was great. She, it talked about the parable was in the box, but that it was kind of hard to get into. That probably went over the head of the children, but I appreciated it.
Well, it's like Bugs Bunny. I mean, there are a lot of Bugs Bunny, lines that would, were appeal to children, but, really were for adults. So. John, you had something? Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, I probably just looking through my text.
Okay. Any others?
Well, one thing I noticed is the text does not refer to the birds. I don't think. I don't know.
We'll see. We're gonna read it in just a second. So.
Okay.
Can I have the citation, please? Where are we?
We are.
Which book?
We aren't anywhere yet. We are listening to the story. I'm sorry. So why don't we go ahead to the actual citation? Well,
You're almost there.
You're almost there. So go to the.
No, I mean, I wanted to share screen, not click on the.
Christine, this parable is told 3 times in the Gospels. It's in each one of the Synoptic Gospels. It does not appear in John. The text is remarkably uniform. And what we're going to do, with your permission, is you'll note that this particular parable in each one of the Synoptic Gospels, consists of a parable, a saying of Jesus, and then it's going to have a few verses about the purpose of parables, and then it's going to have a few more verses about Jesus telling the disciples what it meant, his explanation. So, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read the text from Mark 4, 3 through 9. Barbara, would you read that for us?
Okay. Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky ground, where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30 and 60 and 100-fold. And he said, let anyone with ears to hear listen.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next slide and read the text as it is from, I think it's from Matthew.
No, it's Luke.
Or Luke, okay. No, I didn't do them all. And the reason I didn't do Matthew is because Matthew is really pretty much word for word this. There are going to be a few little nuance changes in Luke's telling of the story. And Laura, would you favor us with a reading of that? Well, and next.
Switch it to Luke.
Yeah, switch it to the next slide.
I thought I had switched to mine, so why isn't that?
What trans, I've got it here.
Yeah, this is
There it is. Oh, no, it isn't.
What translation are you using?
this is all from the NRSV.
Okay.
Is it
What-
Couple of technical problems here, folks.
Here.
Hang on a second.
Oh, here we go. A sower went out to sow his seed. And as he sowed, some fell on the path that was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered from lack of moisture. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and it choked it. Some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, "Let anyone with ears to hear listen."
Okay, thank you.
May I ask folks at home, are you seeing Luke on your screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
Oh,
because we are not
we're
here.
not.
Oh.
Well, fortunately, Jody's got it printed out. So, can you go to the next
Let me
slide?
try something here.
Okay, go try something else. The next slide is going to be not from Matthew. Matthew is very much the same language as Mark. But the next text, just for interest's sake, is from the Gospel of Thomas, which I know isn't in your Bibles. It's not part of the canon, but it was extant at the time or somewhere near that time. And the Gospel of Thomas, as most of you know, or all of you know, has many sayings that are that are very similar to the Synoptic Gospels, and sometimes not the least bit similar to the Synoptic Gospels. So, yeah. Would one of you guys be willing to read something from? Yeah.
Go ahead.
And again, I'll ask at home, are you looking at Thomas right now?
Yes.
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 Wow.
This is Thomas 9. Jesus said, "Now the sower went out, took a handful of seeds and scattered them. Some fell on the road. The birds came and gathered them up. Others fell on the rock and did not take root in the soil and did not produce ears. And others fell on thorns. They choked the seeds and worms ate them. And others fell on the good soil, and it produced good fruit. It bore 60 per measure and 120 per measure."
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you've heard three different versions of this parable. And you've heard the godly play story told about this parable. So what do you notice? What struck you about what you heard?
You want a good crop, you've got to have good soil.
Okay, good soil is kind of important, yeah. That about it?
there. No telling how that.
I think it's the squirrel.
Well, this is a little more descriptive in the worms are included in this version.
Yep, there are worms that eat it up. Yeah.
And it's, as Bill says, it's shorter.
It also, didn't the other one say did not produce something, but this one says did not produce ears. It's very specific.
Right.
So
That's specific to the Thomas telling. Yeah.
Mark says grain. But one thing I remember is from a sermon of Kate's a good while ago. She was talking about the soil of our lives and how the soil of our lives is like compost. Any gardeners in here? Compost being the stuff that happens, the stuff that has come in and out of our lives. And it's waste when it starts, but it ends up being absolutely wonderful. Something changes compost when you leave it out with and get some oxygen and moisture in it, and it turns into this wonderful stuff that plants can grow in. The compost of our lives.
Now that goes along with Thomas because compost has worms.
Yeah. Mhm.
So there you go.
And it's good soil. It's the best stuff you can plant seeds in. I do it.
Okay. So both Barbara and Christina are focusing on the soil. Okay. On the good, well, there's other soils obviously available.
That which is dried out and depleted of nutrient.
Right.
And not much can grow in that. So if you get all dried up inside, not much good is going to grow in you.
Yeah, yeah,
Nothing new is going to happen.
right.
There's not going to be any.
But the portion of the parable where the seed falls on the rocky ground, well, I've known people like that. They're hard and rocky. And the root might start and then it can't go any further because
Mhm.
their heart is stone
Sure.
inside.
Sure, absolutely.
Whereas in compost, seeds you didn't even put in there grow up like crazy. I've had volunteer tomatoes and volunteer cucumbers and volunteer flowers coming out of the compost. I guess I put the seeds in there at time one and they germinated and came to life.
Well, you obviously were paying attention to that sermon, that's for sure. So that's, you get a good mark on that. Any other things that you notice about the text that we've read?
I'd like to go back to the birds, because
Okay.
that's at the godly play, that's what she finished with, is what do you think the birds think of this? And of course, in this, they all have the birds eating the seed that fell on the road. And I'm trying to answer the question. And I suppose that the birds wouldn't be grateful for the ones for the seed that fell in good soil because it produced fruit. But that also, fruit is eaten by some birds. So I guess I'm puzzled with what that's all about.
Why she asked that question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to set that aside for just a second.
Okay.
Perhaps we'll come back to that, because one of the things that, well, let me just say, was there any other things that you noticed about the text?
One thing I noticed was sort of the question of why was the sower allowing these precious seeds to go in onto surfaces that any farmer would know would not be productive.
Seems kind of haphazard, doesn't it?
Yeah, and really, unlike the text is unlike the godly play in that it's not that the sower went and put it on the path and then went and put it on the rocks and then etc., but rather just threw it out and some went here and some went there and some went there and someone went there, and so it was haphazard. And it's interesting to think, well, you could draw analogies if this was God's word and he's making it available to everyone, not just those that he thinks will make good use of it. But if you look at it from a farmer's perspective, it was very wasteful. So anyway, the observation, not quite sure what it means.
Thank you.
And the closing with those with ears, listen. And so it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It has more than one meaning, which you happen to get it explained right there in scripture.
That's right. just one little minor detail perhaps is that there is a disagreement among the texts as to what does the good soil produce. In Mark, it's 30 or 60 or 100-fold. In Luke, it's 100. In Thomas, it's 60 or 120. So why the writers, disagreed on that point, I'm not sure, but there is a disagreement about that. But other than that, most of the text is pretty close. So let's move on. There's some other little sides. So just a few little things. We'll go through these really quickly, probably, maybe, I don't know. So the next slide is a couple of icons.
Folks at home, are you seeing icons?
Yes.
We are seeing them here too. That's wonderful.
Good.
Okay, so you can
Beautiful.
you can see these icons. You can see the birds and the rocks and all the details from the parable. Michael, would you if you have any comment, please feel free to just jump right in. But otherwise, we'll go through these little art pieces.
The only comment I wish to make here is you pointed out that the numbers were slightly different in the three versions. And yet here we have two completely different icons and Jesus looks the same. He's dressed the same. So mirror image, but the same. Okay.
The next one is from 16th century German. So this would be an early Protestant representation of the story. Move on to the next one. The next one is Peter Bruegel, the elder. You can see, thank you, Michael.
Yes.
The sower is right there. As typical for Bruegel, the named action tends to be kind of way down in the buried in the painting, because the artist wants us to see the big picture and so forth. This is one of the few Bruegels. Actually, I think it's the only Bruegel that's in an American or North American museum. Most of the rest of them are in the Art History Museum in Vienna. But you can see Michael down on the beach.
The gathering.
Yeah.
Across the,
over here.
yeah,
You're
the
right.
gathering.
Yeah.
The
Right. So perhaps Jesus teaching the people, who knows, so forth. Michael, can you move on to the?
Joe, one thing about this, I think that's sort of interesting is that it points out what the fields were like. We have agribusiness now with enormous machinery. Until very recently, people were casting seed where they had barely cleared of rocks or trees in this case. And so I'm not sure it was wasteful. Maybe they were doing the sower was doing the best he could with what space he had to cast the seed and hope for the best. That's all.
Yeah, one of the things that that Jody and I picked up on, in reading about this, is there's some question among theologians, scholars, as to whether Jesus really knew what he was talking about when he was, because we kind of have this notion that Jesus knew what he was talking about as far as farming practices are concerned, because he grew up in a farming society, a rural society. And so one of the things to note is there's a big debate about whether the sower actually was doing, as Susan just said, and sowing in a proper manner, because normally what would happen, he would do the broadcast, sowing, and then there would be plowing. But the other thing is that you could plow first and then do the broadcast sowing, in which case the broadcast scattering, as it happens in this case, might not make quite as much sense. But we don't know. And I don't know whether that's an important part of the parable or not. Several of you and several of our classes on parables, have talked about, well, what's the difference between a parable and an allegory, or a parable and just some other teaching that Jesus makes. And kind of the operative definition that I would use is a parable is a short, description taken from life that is there to illustrate a point about our relationship to God. And it calls for us to do something.
Yeah.
It calls for us to act.
Enact.
So listen, if you, those of you who have ears, hear. And so when you're listening to this parable, that's the way Jesus, ends this particular parable. Listen, pay attention. Let's go to the very last slide. This is from a more, I think, 19th century French painter. And this gives you another depiction of what the soils might look like, how the procedure might be. If you read the little description, which I know is impossible to read, I'm not going to try to do it right now. This gives you a little bit of an idea about this French artist's description of Jesus's making sense about, when he's telling this story about this, where those were actual farming practices from the time that Jesus lived. So,
and that he's Jewish, he's dressed.
Exactly, yeah, and that he's dressed as Jewish, and yeah, all the details are consistent with all of that. So,
Yes.
right. So, if you get really interested in Tissot, he has illustrated a number of biblical scenes, and is a pretty interesting artist to look at. So, Michael, would you go to the next slide?
We will, except I'm going to pause here
Yes.
for a commercial announcement.
Mhm.
Over the summer, we had a wonderful series on Thursday night about poetry and portraits of people in Pentecost. Very alliterative. And beginning November 18th on Thursday, and for 5 consecutive Thursdays, except of course taking off US Thanksgiving, Joe and Linda Privatera are going to be doing a somewhat similar, except it's going to be a view of each of the Gospels as we're leading up to the acknowledgement of the incarnation. And I don't think as much poetry as what I was told, but use of images still. So if you've enjoyed the last few minutes of going through these, then I'm going to recommend to you that on Thursday nights, beginning November 18th, you tune in for the presentation starting with the Gospel of Matthew on November 18th.
Well, thank you.
That was a good commercial.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well done, and he'll do a great job.
That's right.
Oh, the ones this summer were phenomenal. I'd still get tickled though. So half the audience was from Jacksonville, half from, I keep on saying half and half, plus one, because one lady was from Jamaica. But half from Jacksonville, half from Ottawa. And one of the Ottawans just could not understand not only like what state Joe came from, but I think almost like what planet, because of his bizarre accent.
It's like, can I take-
And I've never noticed that Joe had an accent.
Joe, I just want to thank you for sharing those wonderful pictures. The notion of the sower that we can see in those renditions is so important. It's just wonderful. And by the way, there's a Bruegel at the Crocker Museum in Sacramento.
Ah, okay. Well, I figured that there must be, but the Timken in San Diego said, well, we've got the only one in North America. I said, well, okay. I'm
Really?
not gonna pick that.
I think it's a clothes washing scene, as I dimly remember. I mean, it may have been on a rotating exhibit, but
Well, I'm gonna look it up when I get home. I'll look, that's something I'll look up. So let's look real quickly at well, one of the things that we're going to ask you about toward the end is, do you think this parable is properly named? I mean, or is this does this parable need to be rebranded, as some people would have put it? Right now, the Bible tends to, if you want to look it up, if you look up the sower, Well, that's what you're going to find this. If you looked up the parable of the good soil, the indexes would not take you anywhere. If you looked up the parable of the careless sower, you wouldn't find anything. I mean, so there are a number of different ways to do this. In fact, you know, what we're looking at is a parable with several different similes. Is it like, so we're talking about seeds, we're talking about soils, we're talking about the sower. Who is that? You know, who is that intended to be? And then the main thing, if you look at the parable having a point, the last thing that we're talking about is the harvest. So what is this parable really about? And you know, in the literature, there are any number of explanations as to what this parable is about. Well, maybe we'll look at what Jesus is supposed to have said about that. So we're going to do that in just a second. But it might be important to note that in each one of the synoptic gospels, there are a few sentences about, or a few verses right after the parable is told and right before Jesus starts to say, okay, I'll tell you what it's about. And it's this kind of thing. So Barbara, would you be our market reader again?
Okay. When he was alone, those who were around him, along with the 12, asked him about the parables. And he said to them, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. But for those outside, everything comes in parables, in order that they may indeed look, but not perceive, and may indeed listen, but not understand, so that they may not turn again and be forgiven.
Okay, well, that's one way to look at it. I know that many of you will know that the last quote is from Isaiah 68. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit, perhaps. But you'll also notice that this is from Mark, and it's not at all uncommon for Jesus and Mark to say, no, don't go tell anybody what we just saw or what just happened.
The secret of the kingdom.
The secret of the kingdom. But let's look at what Matthew has, or is Matthew the next one?
No, yeah.
Yeah, So let's look at what Matthew has to say about this, because he really gets wound up on this one. So Laura, would you read that one?
Well, let's ask somebody at home, because the print's
Oh,
a little,
yeah,
print's a
absolutely.
little bit smaller here.
Oh, please, yeah.
So let's see if somebody at home, if they can see it maybe a little bit larger than the people can sitting far away. Somebody at home, can you read that pretty clearly?
Okay. Then the disciples came and asked him, why do you speak to them in parables? He answered, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to those who have, much will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that, quote, seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they might not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see, to hear what you hear, but did not hear.
Thank you. And because it's a bit different, we also included the purpose of parables from Luke. So I think.
Yes.
So Michael, yeah, there we go.
A little more succinct.
Yeah. So Christine or Claude or John, would one of y'all read that?
Sure.
Then his disciples asked him what this parable meant. He said, to you and it had been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God, but to others I speak in parables, so that looking they may not perceive, and listening they may not understand.
Okay. Thomas does not have any such comment. So we're out of Thomas. Don't worry about him anymore. What comment do you have about these few verses from these three gospels?
They're kind of clubby.
They sure are.
Yeah, it worries me.
Yeah, me too. It's troublesome.
I'm also a little bit puzzled as to what the meaning is, because if you take it just at the basic level, it kind of is like Jesus saying, you're not going to get this at all. You know, you're just not, that's it. You're just not going to get this. But because these always seem to be paired, looking they may not perceive and listening they may not understand, is his point. You've got to do both to put together the whole package. You know, you've got to look and listen to understand what's going on. So I think there are two very different ways of looking at this.
Yeah, I see another is that he's saying to the disciples, you already understand. But when he talks to others, I speak in parables so that they can't. That I don't understand.
I don't either. I speak in parables so that listening you may not understand. Give me a break.
Well, I didn't make this up. So, I mean, you know.
It's your fault.
I guess maybe we don't understand. But why is he telling these then? I mean, the disciples already know. But
maybe if we had the original and we could read Aramaic Greek, maybe the translation isn't quite right. Many times Kate will discuss what a word in the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic Greek or Hebrew isn't quite what the English version is.
Maybe it could read, I speak in parables so that looking, they look at it, but they still don't get it. And listening, they still don't hear what they need to hear. That the parables are meant to help them with this.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
So he's saying the purpose of the parable is not to make them not perceive. Saying that they stand in a position where they're not perceiving and they're not understanding. So perhaps the parables help.
Yeah. Otherwise, it looks like the parables are meant to hide the truth, hide the message.
That's the way it reads in plain English is I'm speaking in parables so you won't understand.
Well, maybe it's so that the disciples who do understand interpret or help the others understand.
Spread the word.
Could be.
And in one of the passages, it's not the disciples asking, but some other people standing around.
Right.
I don't know if that's significant.
Well,
It's the gospel writers.
That-
maybe
that's
Jesus
right.
didn't say it at
Yeah,
all.
it is entirely possible that Jesus didn't say this. So that's exactly right. Or that it got misunderstood by the writer or by the disciples. And I mean, that would be the first time that ever happened. So with that, we probably will not resolve the meaning of this. So let's go to the next thing, because I know our time is short. And so let's look at Jesus's explanation.
If I could just ask Susan real quickly, Susan, do I recall, is that kind of a hallmark of godly play? You don't necessarily answer every question. You leave some things for the mind of the learner.
You never answer a question. You ask, how does it feel? What does it make you think of? What do you say about this?
Right.
You never answer a question. You know, and I wonder, John is so good at context That got me thinking about this. What if, and John, I apologize if I'm completely off base, but what if this is speaking in code and people who are ready to understand will piece it out, and people who are not and are about to report him to the Sanhedrin will not have any material to work with?
Ooh, that's good.
Well, I don't know what John will say, but I know that there are certainly a number of scholars and theologians who take exactly that view, who say that Jesus was talking pretty much in code and that he's perfectly happy to explain what he means to people that he wants to know the answer or who need to know the answer. But he knew that his ministry, his time on earth was going to be short, and he wanted to get as much out there as he could. The other thing that you could do, and we brought in a few things just to, not that you'll know or want to know about all this in all this detail, but for example, N.T. Wright, who many of us read and who has written gazillions of pages of things, but who has a generally pretty good reputation in Anglican circles. N.T. Wright would take the position that that's pretty much what was going on here, and that it is important to note, that when Jesus is telling the story about the path, the soil that is hard packed dirt, or the thorns or the rocks, that all of that has to do with with what's happened to Israel.
Backwards.
What's happened to Israel? What's happened to the remnant in Israel? And that this parable really is about the restoration of Israel, although not in the way that many in the Hebrew scriptures would have understood it, but that Jesus is really the bringer of the good harvest, and the harvest is going to be the restoration of Israel. That's one explanation about this whole thing, and that really kind of fits in with all the elements of the story. But Jesus has another thing, and this is more what we're going to hear about in sermons. And I'm not being critical of that. I mean, this is what what Jesus is reputed to have said, and this is from Mark, so probably this is the earliest of the Gospels. And so Barbara, did you go with this one again?
And he said to them, "Do you not understand this parable? Then how will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word. These are the ones on the path where the word is sown. When they hear, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. And these are the ones sown on rocky ground. When they hear the word, they immediately receive it with joy, but they have no root and endure only for a while. When trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. And others are those sown among the thorns. These are the ones who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth and the desire for other things come in and choke the word, and it yields nothing. And these are the ones sown on good soil. They hear the word and accept it and bear fruit 30 and 60 and 100-fold.
Thank you. So, because when this is read in church, or when you read this, from a devotional point of view, you tend to read, or we tend to read, I tend to read the parable together with the explanation. There are a couple of parables, where there is an explanation that's given. Most of them don't have, Jesus's, footnotes, well, this is what I meant when I told you this parable. So it's left up to us. And so this is given to us perhaps as a way to understand how parables are supposed to be, worded. But this is kind of, this is kind of a, there are multiple elements in this story, and there are multiple things that we could take away from this story. So, but if you read this, if this is the explanation, well, let's just posit this is the explanation. What does this tell you about yourself? What action would you take? What does the parable mean?
He spoke the parable to everybody who could hear him, but the explanation only for the disciples.
Mhm.
To me, I wonder whether he is in a way warning them that you won't always be successful. Just because you talk to 100 people does not mean 100 people will receive it and 100 will be saved and 100 will become followers. Some will go this way, some will go that way, some will go another way. Maybe it's kind of a pep talk. Don't be discouraged.
Despite failures,
Do the work anyway.
keep doing the work, and ultimately you'll have success.
14 is pretty important. The sower sows the word. If we are all sowers, then we have to be, try to achieve the best result.
Mhm.
And in verse 1, it says that the one sown on the good soil, they hear the word and accept it and bear fruit.
Yes.
So Joe and Jody won't be surprised to hear me say faith without works is dead. Because, if all you do is come to church on Sunday and listen to the sermon and nod your head and say that was brilliant, and then you go home and the rest of the week you completely ignore it or don't do anything about it, what good has that brilliant sermon done anyone?
St. James agrees with you.
Mhm.
Yes, they know that.
Others, other comments?
In other readings, when I've looked at this through the years, I've often thought, what a random situation. Like the seeds don't have a choice of where they're going. Some seeds go into a place that's easy to grow and bear fruit. Some seeds go in a place that's an impossible task. But of late, I've recognized that the story is a story, but we have the option of choosing our reception of our placement. And we have an opportunity to
Bloom where we're planted.
bloom where we're planted and find good soil. I guess is where, if you're
Be good
if
soil.
you're hearing and believing takes root, then that's the point of the story, as opposed to where you were randomly scattered.
Mhm.
And that we have that opportunity to either take root or not take root. And the scattering on the path, when you can't find soil on the path. So obviously you're just going to get eaten by the birds. But that's the story part. And that God's using that to let us know that we do, in fact, have an opportunity, regardless of where we're sown, to take the word in and have it take root in us.
Mhm. Great, thanks. Absolutely.
So now I'm interested to see, after all that's been said and shown, how are Jody and Joe going to wrap all this neatly in a package?
Can I just add a speculation? And my speculation is that everything that follows the parable is an allegory added by Mark, Matthew, or Luke years after Yeshua told the original story. In each of the three synoptics, he ends the parable with a simple statement: "He who has ears, let him hear." Pregnant pause. Then he goes on to another parable. I think all of the additions in the synoptic gospels were written as late, Mark could be as early as in the mid 50s, some say late 40s, but I think it's more like mid 50s. Clearly, Matthew and Luke were very likely written after the destruction of the temple in late 60s to early 70s. And they were trying to explain a theological issue. Why were some people saved and some people not? I think the allegorical explanation reaps of a determinism that later theologians have wrestled with as a way to explain the issue. I think Yeshua's statement, if you look how the story is placed in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I think it makes perfect sense if you just skip the whole allegorical piece. That doesn't mean that we disregard the Gospels. I think we need to ask the question, what does it say to us? But I think it's a whole different level between what Yeshua was actually saying and what the subsequent early church tried to wrestle with, the distinction of why did the disciples know some things and other people not know things? So my brief speculative takeaway is the best way to understand it is to stop after each of the three synoptics in their initial story. And with Yeshua's words, he who has ears, let him hear.
Well, John, thank you. I don't disagree with anything that you've said. I think Jody would probably
Agree too.
would agree as well. I would say though that the explanation that's given is a possible explanation. I mean, it's one of many explanations, and I think that John is exactly right. That when we as Christians are listening to parables, we need to open our ears. I certainly, would admonish myself this way. I need to listen to what's going on and puzzle this out. As Susan knows, one of the things that I like to do is to think about my dreams and to think about, what do they mean? Well, there's a certain similarity between dreams and parables. They both use
At here.
I think we lost the
Right here.
cathedral.
Michael, can you hear us?
I think we can hear each one another, but we're missing the cathedral.
Uh-oh.
We can see but not hear.
Right.
Good, Claude.
Very good, Claude.
I got something out of this.
Oh,
Does anybody think of the Sunday sermon? The worries, you hear the sermon and then the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth and the desires for other things come in and choke the word. Doesn't that make you think of a Sunday sermon? You hear this good stuff and you go home and you start worrying immediately about the mortgage, the kids, whatever it is, your paycheck, your investments, and how you need a vacation. Then suddenly you've forgotten the word.
Right.
Did we lose that?
Well, someone lost someone.
yeah, it's amazing.
Michael,
Michael's probably trying, oh, there he is.
Michael's,
He's connecting
stationary.
again.
I think he's trying to get us. Hello, Michael. We can see you.
you're muted. Michael, you're muted.
Something happened with the computer, not with you and not with Zoom. Something happened with the computer. What I told the group here is when the video is posted this week, I'll also ask Nancy to post the entire PowerPoint presentation so that you'll be able to see any slides that you hadn't seen today. All right?
All right.
Okay. Well,
All right.
to the extent that you can talk to the people there, it was very, very good presentation. Great discussion.
Very good.
Thank them. Thank
And
Joe
well-
and Jody.
Yes, but.
While I have you all on, while I have you all on the phone and they're thanking Joe and Jody, if you can't hear them on my phone. And I will also tell all of you, whether you're here or at home, next week is Lewis Hunt, who will be presenting The Wheat and the Tares. So that is next week on Wednesday, and we look forward to any of you joining us then. All
Good.
right.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good
thank
night.
you very
Good
much.
night to all.
Hi.
God bless you all.